What's your best? It was the most inappropriate time to laugh, but I lost it story. I was at Pearson Airport in Toronto waiting for a flight, sitting in the terminal minding my own business. A mother comes in, apparently managing 2 young children, like a 6-year-old and a very young toddler. Anyways, she sets the toddler on a seat for a moment to reach into her purse for something, and the toddler immediately hops off the chair and takes off running. Beelined straight into a glass wall head first. Was kind of like a bird flying into a window. I jiggle shitted. I lost it at my great-grandmother's funeral. The organist was going to play a song entitled You'll Never Walk Alone. The announcer said, and now the organist playing, You'll Never Walk Again. I laughed pretty hard. Crap, Liverpool fans are frickin' dedicated. My grandmother was dying. She'd been dying for a couple of years. The doctors would say she had 6 months. Then 3, then 2, then another 6. I think the family had just given up on the doctor's predictions and figured she was too stubborn to go. Then, suddenly, it was happening. My dad called to let us know it was time, and my husband and I immediately drove 6 hours to see her one last time before she was gone. We got there, spent some time with her, talked to her as much as possible through all the morphine. She clearly wasn't going just yet. So we went to my aunt's house to get some sleep. 3 AM, my dad calls again to tell us it was time. We threw on clothes, hauled butt for the 25-minute drive across town, and got to my grandmother's house to find the entire family around her in the bedroom. Then, well, it turned into a hilarious and awkward scene. Grandmother asked us to say the Lord's Prayer. My immediate family are all atheists, agnostics. But whatever, it's what she wanted. The thing is, none of us, even my Christian extended family, could get past Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed by thy name. Thankfully, the hospice nurse had clearly heard it one too many times and fed us lines which we repeated. Then grandmother asked us to say Psalm 23. We got through the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, and trailed off. Once again, hospice nurse to the rescue. My grandmother's response, oh, that's just the way we always used to say it. Then my grandmother tried to die. Seriously, she was ready, she was straining to die, not sure what she thought would happen, but the woman was determined to go. She didn't. At that point, my dad, my husband, and I had to leave the room. We knew we were going to lose it in front of everyone, and the entire situation was just too ridiculous. We got away from the room and laughed until we were almost in tears. To top it all off, grandmother didn't die that weekend. Husband and I had to get back home. He had to go to work and I was in grad school. She hung on for another week. I still smile when I think about the incident. I'm glad that the last time I saw my grandmother there were still laughs. TLDR. My family was totally unable to recite the Lord's Prayer or Psalm 23 for my grandmother. She tried to die. It didn't work. I manage a program that provides services to people with developmental disabilities. DD. One of my co-workers who manages a habilitation program, a program to develop living skills, had an award ceremony for her DD adult men who had done really good that year. One of them is extremely low functioning and can barely form sentences, and you never know what's gonna come out of his mouth. She insisted that he had come so far that she wanted him to speak at the event. He walked up to her in a gym full of people. She handed him the mic, and he said fuck until she pulled the mic away from him. I lost my crap. I was cracking up so hard. His parents were sitting next to me. My wedding was a comedy of errors. It is full of wonderful and hilarious memories and are a gift that showed up about 9 months from the day of the ceremony. But there is one part of the wedding that I remember where I just had to snicker during the ceremony. We got married in a big Catholic church. We're both Christians, but she was Catholic and I'm not. The rehearsal dinner featured my 4 other groomsmen having to go out and search my wife's hometown for my best man, who was wandering around drunk and stoned looking for a Chinese restaurant. He then arrived 30 minutes late, smelling of bourbon and trying to shove as much General Tso's chicken in his mouth as he could as they led him up the aisle toward the priest. But that was just the setup. The next day during the ceremony, we're about halfway through the mass when the priest places his hand on my wife's and my shoulders and says P33J and wife. It won't just be the two of you getting married. My best man, who had a tendency to be stoned just about all the time, was agreeing verbally with just about everything the priest said, despite being a devout Christian Catholic that goes to mass only on Christmas and Easter. Now, I'm just doing my best not to turn around and say, dude, shut up, I'm getting married, so I'm completely unprepared for what comes next. The priest continues, no P33J and wife, you're entering a threesome, or threesome with Jesus. My best man, amen. I couldn't help it, my wife blushed and sniffed a bit trying to keep her composure, but I could see her face shaking, she was laughing so hard. And I just snorted out loud, right in front of the priest, the wedding party and our 400 guests. And then I shook as I tried to keep from howling. For about another 5 minutes, the only thing racing through my head was, well crap, how am I supposed to follow that? Immediately followed by, can't think of a threesome with Jesus, do not picture a threesome with Jesus. Needless to say, anytime we talk about our wedding, this story comes up. TLDR. Priest told my wife and I during our wedding mass that we were about to have a threesome with Jesus. Gives new meaning to leaving enough room for Jesus. I didn't laugh, but I caused laughter with my inappropriate statement. My brother had been murdered in the hospital, and it was that magical, numb time between the event and the funeral. The community outpour of sympathy, food was reasonably good, and for 3 days, everyone in the household took turns answering the doorbell and shuffling back upstairs to the kitchen with arms full of food. One day, it was my turn again. I open up the door to a middle-aged woman who shoves a laundry basket of bagels, jams, and cream cheeses into my chest. Post somber greetings. As if to explain it, she remarks, I heard you had a big family. I reply, looking straight into her eyes, used to be bigger. The color drained from her face as she stood there. I said goodbye, and closed the door, having thanked her for the bagels. I like to imagine she ran away like a house guest on an episode of The Munsters. At the top of the steps, my family was awestruck. I hadn't yet realized what I said, as it was pure snap instinct. I looked up at them, the basket still in my grasp, and asked what as they stared at me in disbelief. That finished off my sister, as she began to snort, which broke into full laughter. My remaining brother followed, and then my parents. It was the first time they'd laughed in days, and the last time for a few weeks after that. My brother had been murdered in the hospital. I feel this needs some expansion. I work for a large cancer charity, a society if you will, an American one. Anyway, we had our all-staff briefing a few weeks back and this always includes a cancer survivor story. A woman came on and told one of the most absurdly sad stories ever about her toddler developing a brain tumor the size of an orange in his grapefruit-sized head, the surgery, radiation, chemo, Make-A-Wish Foundation, and his eventual death, and her subsequent diagnosis with breast cancer like 6 months later. Now, it was actually worse than it sounds. She was misdiagnosed twice. The tumors behaved strangely. They were resistant to chemo. Finding the right cocktail was difficult. Anything that could have gone wrong did in both stories, except in the end she survived. The woman is in tears the entire time. The audience is in tears. There's a loud metallic snapping and clanging from backstage and my first thought was, oh, that must have been her armless grandmother landing on a series of bear traps bafflingly arranged around the catering table, likely due to the high pressure need for a cathartic release. I began snickering at my own dumb, hyperbolic joke about the pathos that stalks this woman's family. The snicker began to build and I'm pretty sure my nose almost started bleeding trying to stifle it. My boss was right next to me sobbing. I think the only thing that saved my job is she thought my near apoplectic laughing fit was actually an attempt to hold back tears. Oh sweet Jebus, I'm at my desk weeping. That's brilliant right there. A friend of mine was telling this traumatic story from his childhood where he accidentally shattered his best friend's eye socket on the backswing of a golf club. It got kind of quiet when he stopped and another guy asked, "You mean your best friend can't see out of his right eye anymore because of you? How do you sleep at night?" I immediately said, "Probably with one eye open." Everyone around me was giving me the stink eye but I couldn't stop laughing. When our agent asked why I had explosive material in my backpack, I thought dude was kidding. then realized they would never kid over this. He was as serious as a heart attack. After sirens going off and serious groping, it was revealed they had a faulty machine. I had a similar experience to ARPS. I was at my grandpa's funeral 6 years ago. I was 16. My grandpa's name was John, but he went by his middle name Richard, so everyone just called him Dong. So before the funeral started, the woman conducting the service brought us all into a small room so we could talk and get ourselves mentally prepared for the service. So she's talking to us, and we have to remember the way that we touched Dong's life, and the way that Dongs touched us. Dongs touched us, Dongs touched us, Dongs touched us. And that's the story about how I'm a terrible person. I was at my great aunt's funeral, and even though I didn't know her that well, I went to support my then stepfather. Near the end, the priest asked if anyone had any final words they'd like to share about my aunt. My stepdad stood up, said he would. Now, someone working at the funeral home had left the radio on, so as my stepdad was walking towards the casket, I Wanna Sex You Up starts playing, and I absolutely lost it. Right, okay, my grandfather had died and we were burying him. I was trying to comfort my 15-year-old little brother, who was into games and Halo in a big way, telling him oh granddad had a long and happy life. Look at the people around here, there's very few friends. He was 95 years old. I think if you go to more funerals of your friends than come to yours you win. Then I said this, in the middle of a church while the priest was speaking. He definitely got the last man standing award. Didn't realize what I said until a few seconds later when my little brother's face folded up trying not to laugh. I burst out laughing, but it was short enough that it sounded like a sob. I was having one of the worst days of my life. Earlier in the day, the owner of the cafe I worked at decided to close up shop without letting anyone know. When I called my girlfriend to tell her this, she interrupted me by saying she thinks we should see other people. When I got back to my apartment, we found out the heat had caused a power outage, so I didn't have fans, or a friend with a working refrigerator, or the internet to take my mind off all this. At the beginning of the evening, I eventually convinced myself to get off the couch and stop the self-pity crap to go down to the lake and watch the water for a bit and relax. When I got to my normal water watching spot, a man came up to me, brandishing a knife and screaming gimme all your money. I looked at him and totally freaking lost it. I couldn't breathe. I was laughing too hard. The man stood there, confused, as my laughing went on and on. After about 4 minutes, he says frick this crap, you're all crazy, and books it. TLDR. I had a really bad day and the stress of it scared off a mugger. We found him. Walter White is a Redditor. I saw Titanic in the theater when it came out and I went with a few girls. Most of the movie is a big cry fest and somewhat serious, but when I saw people jumping off of the ship and smacking into the propellers I couldn't stop laughing. I was at the funeral of my aunt. In Belgium there is a dialect that changes the G and H and vice versa. This caused the priest to say July Hayest, which roughly translates as the frisky spirit. I had to clench my mouth shut really hard not to laugh at that one, especially since he kept saying it throughout the service. I posted a fart story early, but I almost remembered another one and I'm shamefully posting that too. It was my nan's funeral over in Ireland 2 years back. Lovely, amazing woman, and the near entirety of the small town cared deeply for her. As is the way, we got the news that she had passed and were on the next flight over from Heathrow. We arrived in the evening just as the wake was starting. An Irish wake is something to behold. Nan was brought home in an open casket and left to lay in the lounge so people could say their goodbyes. First, the women of the family would make her presentable, makeup and brushing of hair, putting on her favorite jewelry. When they were finished, a line had formed outside and people came in to pay their respects. Now there is no time limit, lots of food and lots of alcohol, so hundreds of people would crowd in to tell stories, sing a song or two and then make their way home when they were ready. The wake lasts all night and until the funeral, so the immediate family keep a vigil all night so she always has company. My brother and I took from 11 PM until dawn so my mum could get some rest. It was at this time that the pubs closed, and the saltier of the town's denizens would come up for a nightcap and to send her off. One of those who entered first was John Killivan, well known for having uncontrollable flatulence. which my nan happened to find hilarious, though she cursed him daily for a dirty beggar. He let one off a single, low, mournful fart at her casket which sounded part foghorn, part pining dog, and he walked out with the utmost dignity, shaking both our hands. We had tears in our eyes from laughter and the smell, but I think we got away with it. I was a pallbearer at a funeral home. I had a magnetic name tag on my suit. We were carrying a metal casket and the name tag jumped off my suit and stuck itself to the casket without anyone noticing. I just heard a noise and noticed that my name tag was gone. During the service, my colleagues and I started looking for the name tag. When I saw it on the casket, I pointed it out to a colleague and we both started laughing. I mean, uncontrollably. Mine was also at a funeral, my grandfather's last year. The viewing had finished up and people had been talking for a while. Eventually people started to filter out of the building a few at a time and things got progressively quieter inside. I was sitting next to my wife and brother on some chairs, and one of my late grandfather's friends, I presume, I didn't know her, was standing up, right near me, talking to someone else. Well, out of nowhere, she let out the loudest, most inappropriate sounding fart, practically right in my face. She didn't acknowledge this. It had been such a long and emotionally draining day. I greatly loved my grandfather and still miss him, that the only way we knew how to react was to start laughing. We tried really hard to keep it to ourselves because it seemed so wrong to be laughing at a funeral, but it was all we could do. In some ways, I think I needed that fart to the face to help me through that day. In some ways, I think I needed that fart to the face to help me through that day. My new favorite awkward quote. Better than the horse in college. Me and my brothers were pallbearers at my grandpa's funeral. We were sitting in the front row when my brother asked if it was going to be very heavy when we lifted the casket. I said it shouldn't be that bad. He replied with, I don't even know why y'all are here then. I could do this by myself. I totally lost it when my mind pictured him strapping it on his back and duck walking out. I was lucky that only my brothers knew I was laughing. Everyone else though, I was crying. Remembrance Day in school. Sitting in a big group in the gym as teachers spoke about the wars Canada has been in. Then came the World War II section. This teacher started talking, then said 1.5 Canadians died in World War II. Yep, 1.5. I imagined this guy pushing a guy in a wheelchair with a Gatling gun attached. It was hilarious. I burst out laughing and got suspended for disrespect. How about a story of getting laughed at? In Australia, we all don't have swimming pools. We had a dam built in our place. One hot afternoon several families had gathered and we were enjoying ourselves. A game had developed where we were throwing a softball around and if you got hit, you had to get out and run a full lap of the dam before our Doberman could catch you. She was running around the outside too. She wouldn't bite, just mouth your ankles. One time I got hit. Grace, the dog's name, wasn't in sight. So I thought I had it pretty easy. So I get out and start to jog around. I hear yelling from the people in the dam. I look back to see my doom, Grace, about 4 meters away, a full sprint towards me. I have time to turn around and take about 2 steps when Grace slams into me and I try to run into the dam. Except I can't. Grace has latched onto the back of my Speedos and has given me the mother of all atomic wedgies. She then starts to drag me around, refusing to let go while I'm struggling to prevent me losing my Speedos. In front on say, 15-20 people, all laughing their freaking asses off. Australians having fun. Hey, when I smack you with this ball you have to run a lap around this stack of poison spider infested lumber in 45-degree heat while we sick the Doberman on you. It'll be fun. Big business meeting. Executives. Company you all would have heard of. Someone had a slide that looked like Goat's Man. A red circle with 5 yellow triangles on the left and the right that totally looked like fingers and a box attached at the bottom. I pretended like it was a sneeze they all heard. There's no way I could have explained why I was laughing. Oh, it looks like a picture of a man stretching his butthole with both hands. It's really famous on the internet. Wait, let me see if I can find it. Not as inappropriate as most of the comments in this thread, but I'll bite. Quick background. I used to be an English teacher, EFL, in a school that used the Callan method of teaching English. For those not familiar with Callan, It's a direct method with a focus on question answer drilling. So for instance, I ask a student, what color is the sky, and the student must reply, the sky is blue. Anyway, one time I was teaching a class, and one of the questions I was supposed to ask was, do you like beards? For some reason, this question struck me as hilarious, and I just lost it, right there in front of my class of 12 or so students. And no matter how hard I tried to regain my composure, I could not stop laughing. Tears were running down my face from laughing so hard. I must have laughed for a solid 4 minutes before I finally managed to get it together, only to break into giggles sporadically for the rest of the class duration. I thought for sure I was going to catch heck, but nothing ever came of it. I wasn't the one laughing, but I was there. My uncle had cancer, and hospice had told my aunt to call everybody over because he was about to pass. So my mom, my aunt, and my cousin are sitting next to the bed while the rest of us are in the living room. At one point, the hospice nurse announced he had died, so they kept sitting there saying their goodbyes, and after at least 5 minutes, my uncle sat up and took a huge breath. My mom completely freaked out for a second, jumped back and all that. My aunt lost it, started laughing hysterically. All day that day, she just kept laughing at my mom. I am a nurse that works on a general medicine floor. I had a patient that had not pooped in about 5 days. Laxatives were not doing anything for him, so we had to give him an enema. Our assessment showed he had poop in there, but it just wasn't coming out. I was working with another nuts at the time to help me turn him over and whatnot, so we decided we would use a rectal tube. Basically what the rectal tube does is goes in the rectum, through the mass of poo, so that when you administer the enema fluid it will go past the poo and stay behind it, instead of all dribbling out. We go into this patient room together. Keep in mind this patient is pleasantly, but very confused, and explain to him what is about to happen. The other nurse goes in the room first with the rectal tube flopping about in his hand and says, patient name, we're going to put a tube up your bum so you can poop. The other nurse and I start chuckling at the thought, and then the patient starts laughing. At that point we start losing it. I had to leave the room to collect myself because I couldn't stop laughing. Then we put the rectal tube in his bum and then the patient wasn't laughing. The last sentence just made me snort quite loudly in an otherwise totally silent library. When I was 4, my mom took me bike shopping. There was a little person looking at children's bikes, for obvious reasons, as well. I guess I had never seen a little person before and I lost it. I literally fell to the ground laughing and kept saying, look at that man. Why is he so little? My mom was absolutely mortified, and so was the guy. If I was the little person I would have replied, I once laughed at a little person, and because of that I couldn't grow anymore. Scare the frick out of that little brat. Oh man, definitely reading someone's medical chart as an EMT. Pretty much anytime I was reading someone's medical history and erectile dysfunction showed up I would lose it. It would always happen on the serious cases too. Transferring a critical patient to a specialty hospital, erectile dysfunction. Returning patient to home after surgery for stroke, erectile dysfunction. One time in particular, not ED related, I'm transporting a guy to another branch of the hospital for an ultrasound on his balls. His wife happens to be in the stretcher next to him, admitted for a similar genital injury. 2 doctors are standing next to the stretcher discussing his condition and how potentially serious it could be. Meanwhile, the guy gets this big grin on his face, turns and looks me dead in the eyes, and just mouths the words, "It was worth it." I almost collapsed laughing in the middle of the air. Dude had a raging priapism the whole time. I was taking a crap in my dorm bathroom late at night, and some guy stumbles into the bathroom, obviously drunk, goes into the stall next to me, and starts pee, then immediately sneezes and farts, then falls into the toilet. I couldn't stop laughing. I would argue it's very appropriate to laugh in that situation. The principal of my elementary middle school had died one morning. My best friend thought it would be funny to see if he could get me to laugh by grinning at me from across the room during a school-wide moment of silence. It worked. Back in high school history class, I was giving a speech about how some aboriginals decided to use a white people pool and all the white people were outraged and whatnot. I had apparently typed swimming poop instead of swimming pool. I tried not to laugh but my willpower wasn't strong enough, so I started smirking and eventually giggled a little, all while reading the speech about racism in Australia. Also, I didn't actually think to explain myself, so my classmates and teacher probably thought I was a bigot. My ex dragged me to church for Christmas Mass one year. While the priest was getting the body of Christ ready for communion, I started to hear Cartman yelling punch and pie in my head. I managed to stop from just laughing out loud by coughing and biting my tongue inside of my cheeks. It was close though. I was having dinner with my best friend Jacob and his extended family when we were in 11th grade. It was a fairly formal occasion. My best friend's little brother, Sean, a mouthy 12-year-old, was sitting right beside us. At one point, Sean makes a dumb joke. I don't even remember what it was, but Jacob shakes his head and says, "Raise your hand if you think that was stupid." This elicited a few chuckles from the aunts, uncles, and grandparents at the table. Without missing a beat, Sean says, "Raise your hand if you think Jacob's still a virgin." All the relatives were mortified. The parents yelled at Sean. Jacob was completely destroyed by his little brother's comeback. I was covering my face with a napkin, silently exploding with laughter. GCSE English exam. So much for staying silent throughout the exam. I was absolutely cracking up. It's their fault for putting a Monty Python sketch in the exam to analyze. The more I read it, which I had no choice but to do, the more I was laughing. I don't get how everyone else was managing to stay quiet. Quit a job, then boss was convincing me to stay, offering me new things to work on, etc. Thought to myself, I want my father back, you son of a b, and couldn't stop laughing. When I was about 13, my great aunt was in the hospital. Mind you, she had Alzheimer's, having been from Germany and lived through the Holocaust. I suppose her brain lost track of where she was and went back to that time. One day we were visiting her when the nurse walked in and waved to my family and I. My 90-something-year-old aunt sits up, extends her arm and proceeds to exclaim "Heil" rather loudly, while everyone else stood there in shock. Needless to say, I lost my crap until tears were streaming down my face. TLDR. Ancient Alzheimer's-ridden aunt responds to wave by saluting Hitler. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.